I'm going to show how I save my needle position and then shut down my machine, and then when I come back up, how I get back to that same spot. But before I start, I want to say a couple things that will make a difference. When I set up a pantograph for my quilt, I set up the whole pantograph and I set up the whole sewing sequence all at once. I also make my quilt layout way bigger than what my quilt actually is. For instance, this quilt, we'll just say it's about 60 by 60. I made my layout 90 by 90. I just like to have extra on the edges, so that's going to make a difference when I show stuff. So I'm stopped here at the end of the row that I just stitched, and I'm ready to shut down my machine. So off camera, I moved my machine toward the middle of the quilt, and I picked a point that I have already stitched, just like if I was going to realign my quilt. And I'm actually going to put a pin in the quilt to mark that spot, so it's really easy for me to find it when I bring my machine back up. So let's see how well. Okay, I don't know how well you can see that, but right at the end of that snowflake, I'm putting a pin, and that's just a marker so I know where I marked it on the screen. So my machine is still sitting here saying cut threads and touch start, and I also have realign. I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm going to touch my back button, and it still wants me to pull up and secure my bobbin thread. I'm going to touch the back button again, and then I get the message, do you want to save the current needle position, yes or no? And I'm going to check up here, and yep, I have my machine set right on that point, so I'm going to say yes. And it takes me back out to my whole stitching sequence, and I'm going to go back again and back again, and I'm going to shut down my machine. Yes, I do. Okay, it's the next day, and I've come back to my machine. I have not used my IQ for anything in between, because if you have, things may change. I did go ahead and advance my quilt because there's no point in having to do the alignment twice. So my machine is booting up. And I move it close to the center front and say continue. Okay, now I'm going to design sew quilt. I'm going to edit sew existing, and it lights up, and I'm going to say continue. Now what I want you to see here, zoom in, is I have that little red crosshair right there. Now when I start it up in the morning, I'm going to double check because sometimes it'll be off just a hair. So I'm going to make sure it's sitting right there on the end of that snowflake, which is what I'm going to align to. Okay, I still have my pin in the quilt pointing to that spot from the last time I quilted, and I'm going to take my machine and line it up with that point. And now I'm going to go back up to my screen. This is a screen that always comes up when you bring in a quilt when you haven't been aligned. So it doesn't matter if you were starting brand new and you had built your quilt while the IQ wasn't on the mount, you would still need to align here on this point. So it says touch a reference point on the screen. Well, my reference point is the one that I set right before I finished the last time I was quilting. And if you adjusted it slightly, that's fine. So I've touched my reference point. I'm going to say continue, and I've already moved my needle to that spot, and I'm going to say okay. So it doesn't, my IQ is now lined up. It knows where that point is on my quilt. I'm going to zoom back out now so you can see this. Just zoom full. All right, I'm going to say sew quilt. And what I want you to see is, because I haven't done anything with this since the last time I quilted, it's already showing in red what I quilted the last time I quilted. And the reason it's red over here is because I made my quilt extra big and I use the clipping, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that. So I'm going to say, okay, sew quilt. And I have my machine set up to automatically come up with the adjust sequence. If it doesn't, you would have to push pause once the quilt starts going, or if you push sew, then you hit pause immediately and the adjust comes up over here. So I'm going to take my machine over to the edge of the quilt. Well, let me just go ahead and show you. My machine is sitting with the needle at the edge of the quilt. I actually ran it down the side to make sure that I caught the part that was the furthest out. I'll go back up to the screen. Now I'm going to be in the mode for clip. I'm going to tap on my dashed line on the left side in this case, and I'm going to say snap to needle. And it's cutting off all of my extra. Now I just need to touch somewhere else. So I usually just hit the clip again just because I want to turn that line off. If I don't, as I move the machine, it's going to continue snapping to that all the way across. So you just need to touch something else up here to turn off that dashed line. You could touch the other dashed line if you want to. I've come to the other end of the quilt and done exactly the same thing. Run my foot or my needle right along the edge so I know what the furthest point to the right is in this case. And I'm going to touch the dashed line on the right and say snap to needle, and I'm finished. And as soon as I hit finished, it's going to go over to my start point for the first row that hasn't been sewn yet. If you're someone who stitches one row of a pantograph at a time and then sets up the next one, this is what your screen would look like after you finish stitching a row. We can still put in a registration mark to come back to the next time we turn the IQ on. It's just slightly different. We're going to touch realign quilt, and then I'm going to go up, zoom in, and I have moved my machine over. And I'm going to find that point again, and I'm going to go ahead and just mark on the end of that snowflake, and I will put a pin in it. I'm not going to move the camera. It's just like I did before so that I can remember where it was when I turn the thing back on. And then I'm just going to go back, and shut down my system. Now when I come back, when I'm ready to quilt again, I'm going to design sew quilt, edit sew existing, and I want this one continue. And notice, because I haven't done anything else with my IQ since, I haven't done any other program, my registration mark is still right there. So I just will go ahead and line it up, and continue, and OK, and I'm ready to go ahead and sew my next row.